Hey, real quick before the actual meat and potatoes of the video, thanks to Edition for sending the Aspen out to me. It was sent to me for the sake of review, but it wasn't in exchange for any inflated views, and Edition didn't pay me anything, so all thoughts are original and my own. Into the thing. The Aspen is a project that's pretty much been run entirely for and by my buddies. The Aspen is the signature of Adrian Velez, but it's also a collab between Edition and Dressel Designs. Some of you who are more familiar with Caribou Lodge also know that Adrian is on Caribou Lodge, and you might be like, hey, why is Adrian double dipping? Is Adrian cheating on Caribou Lodge? No, Caribou Lodge knows, and they're cool with it. Adrian is actually a joint team member of Edition and Caribou Lodge. Like, he's on both teams. He got permission to be on both. But this being a full-on three-way collab between some of my tightest homies in the community, that's not an opportunity for me to be biased. It's an opportunity for me to be absolutely cruel. It's a collab between Edition and Dressel Designs, and it's a signature of Adrian Velez. If this is bad, it's a tragedy. So, onto the design. Immediately, let's talk about the cap design. As far as I know, this is the only yo-yo released that has this capped design form factor, especially when it comes to an actual retail release. Emphasis on as far as I know. I know there's little prototype runs, especially Yuju, I see you, but I don't think this has been done in any big production thing with units available at an actual shop. So, what makes this so special? Well, the way these rims are formatted is quite literally, the rims are the caps. There are no seams here. You have the rims here, and then they curve around and go into the cap. It's that simple. I think under these caps there's a nipple, but I'm not certain. But beyond that, there's nothing for me to talk about with the hub. It's a cap design. These caps show damage like crazy though. This profile reminds me a lot of Turning Point yo-yos with all these little cuts. The shape of it is reminiscent of a sort of combined form factor of one of the Takeshi Sigs, but tweaked to be a bit sharper overall. Out of the box, it reminded me more of the Collapsar than any other yo-yo, but the more time I've gotten with it, the more I realize it's really just kind of similar to the Turning Point aesthetic. The cuts, the shape, and, it kind of makes it appear very TP-like. Obviously, it's not TP though. So, I have a rule. If there's something that makes a yo-yo stand out, some sort of quirk or some sort of particular design aspect that makes it easier to market, it has to be a good yo-yo. I don't care how cool or unique a yo-yo is, it has to be a good yo-yo to convince me it's not just a sales gimmick. A good example of a yo-yo that does exactly this is the Anti-Mono from Sense Yo-Yo. It's a great yo-yo with a very marketable design aspect. I do want to do a full video review on it, but we'll see if and when that happens. So, how does the Aspen stack up in play? Well, it's not a speed yo-yo. It certainly is capable for it if you push it, but the natural pacing of this yo-yo and its weight definitely lend it to being more reined in and kind of standard with its pacing. Not unlike Turning Point yo-yos, but actually unlike a lot of Turning Point yo-yos, it's not super tech oriented. A lot of Turning Point yo-yos are tech yo-yos, kind of just through and through. There are exceptions obviously, but I've played with so many Turning Point yo-yos where you pick them up and play with them and they're kind of just, they're narrow, more slow playing, not super great for horizontals, and a lot of the time they have lots of power, but not a lot of stability. A great example was the Palp ES, just about the best yo-yo that exists for tech, period. But not much else. If you want to read my thoughts on that, check my review on my yo-yo expert tier list. But the Aspen doesn't fall into that stereotype. It's a very flexible generalist. It just doesn't really have a naturally fast pacing. It's good for horizontals, but you certainly need to give it just a bit more proper attention. The Aspen is good for horizontals, just not like as seamless as some others, which we'll get into later in the comparison section. But it's good for horizontals in general. It has a lot of power and stability, so that makes sense. Those things also make it great for zoning and more janky styles of play. I actually figured out how to do the little underarm hop thing with the Aspen, so it's pretty tight for zoning. For tech, it's especially great because of the power and stability. It's not too wide, and it's actually really pleasant. Something I've neglected to mention is how pleasant the Aspen is in general, despite its weight. Because it uses titanium rings, and titanium is actually less dense than steel, the Aspen is actually not particularly sluggish or heavy feeling despite being 66 grams. It's enjoyable and redirects very nicely. It's not quick, but it's certainly very nicely maneuverable. That maneuverability in tandem with the power and stability make it super capable and super flexible and enjoyable, except for speed. For comparisons, I'm busting out the Miracle and Klondike. I'll start the comparisons with the Miracle because they're both purple. These yo-yos are great opposing examples of maneuverability and pacing. Overall, the Aspen has good maneuverability that doesn't really restrict you, but it plays a bit slower compared to the Miracle. Meanwhile, the Miracle feels less maneuverable compared to the Aspen, but the Miracle's pacing feels higher. Meanwhile, the Miracle feels less maneuverable compared to the Aspen, but the Miracle's pacing feels faster. It's not really in majorly bad ways, though. It's not like the Miracle is an absolute brick of a yo-yo that moves quickly, and it's not like the Aspen feels like a light feather that doesn't want to move. They just oppose each other slightly in those two categories. This is where it's a bit difficult to make the comparison. The Miracle just kind of edges out the Aspen on a lot of performance aspects, but it's only slightly. It's noticeable enough that I have to mention it, so there's that. The Miracle is just a little bit more stable and reliable overall than the Aspen. In terms of power, they're similar, but the Miracle maintains its spin power a tiny bit longer. But again, these things are only slight. They're pretty narrow margins, with the trade-off being that you're getting a slower and more comfortably maneuverable yo-yo. I rate the Miracle higher on my tier list, and I do prefer it slightly, but again, only slightly. I definitely enjoy the maneuverability of the Aspen, and the difference between the performance of the two isn't enough that I really personally care. But the pacing of the Miracle just kind of beats it out for me. They're both seriously tight. Onto the comparison with the Klondike. Compared to the Klondike, the Aspen is a tiny bit faster and a bit more maneuverable. They're very much on the same performance tier. They're both equally capable and reliable, zoning, zontals, tech, etc. I wouldn't approach either of them for speed combos though. They're both capable, but I just don't think their natural pacing doesn't lend them to speed combos. The Aspen moves through tricks a bit faster and doesn't fight you as much. The Klondike has a bit more power, and personally, I just like the shape in my hand of the Klondike better. As for which one I prefer, I don't really have a preference between these two. I really like them both. As for the final tier rating of the Aspen, I'm placing it squarely in S tier. Probably one of the single best executed ways to make a capped yo-yo. Edition is seriously good at making yo-yos, especially bimetals that should play heavier and more reluctant, but have really good maneuverability. I like the Aspen a lot, and you probably would too. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay healthy. Adios.